Thank you all for having me. I am honored to be here to talk with you all about the tribute collection at Flight 93 National Memorial. Before I start this talk, I want to make a couple of disclaimers. The tribute collection is a remarkable assemblage of objects that serves as a record not only of the global response to the September 11th attacks and the 40 heroes of Flight 93, but also to the dedication, foresight, and perseverance of the memorial's first caretakers. I have only been here for 19 months, and when I arrived, the hard work that went into creating the tribute collection was already done. I do not want to take credit for all the good work that my predecessors did, and I am humbled and honored to have inherited this responsibility. Sites of memory attract tributes. Flight 93 National Memorial is not alone in this phenomenon. From the beginning, our collecting policies were modeled on and informed by the work done at sites like Oklahoma City National Memorial and the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. In his 2006 oral history, the Reverend James Simons, who responded on September 11th to the crash site to provide spiritual support, said, quote, "I think people need that sense of place. We're hardwired by God that we have a sense of the numinous, of the spiritual, and that is not something that's ethereal out there in the air, but is very much tied to space," end quote. Our scope of collection statement uses the American Heritage Dictionary 1982 edition definition of tributes as gifts, declarations, or acknowledgments of gratitude, respect, or admiration. But writ larger, the idea that a tribute is an acknowledgement of gratitude, respect, or admiration means that a statue, a constructed memorial, and an event can be a tribute as well. Speaking of the appearance of the first tributes at the crash site, Simons went on to say, quote, "I mean, it's so obvious because when you didn't have it, people created it anyway. They went out and they did it on their own. I don't know where that fence came from, but people were leaving pins and buttons and posters, and again, it goes back to that idea, that's the way we're designed by God. You need that sense of place," end quote. For many years, the temporary memorial, pictured here, was made of tributes. They were integral to the fabrics of the site. Simons' observations on the numinousness of the space and the emotional power of tributes became intertwined at the memorial. There are two questions at the thematic heart of the tribute collection. They provide context for its creation, inform the way the collection is treated, and illuminate the essence of the tributes. Ultimately, these questions provide context for the value and the importance of the collection. These questions are, why did people leave tributes, and who are the tributes for? Both questions focus on the intention behind the tribute, although in many cases, the leaver's intention is not explicitly clear, nor is there necessarily a single reason. Typically, though, the motivation is either extrinsic or intrinsic. The tribute is left with the intention of being seen by others, or the offering is left for personal reasons. The importance of the tributes reflects their status as embodiments of the emotions and intentions of the visitors. Any discussion of the tribute collection has to start with a look at the precipitating event. On September 11, 2001, United Airlines Flight 93, along with 3 other planes, was hijacked by terrorists with the intention of flying it into a high-profile target. In the case of Flight 93, the plane turned towards Washington, D.C. The 40 passengers and crew on board the flight learned of the attacks on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. By taking heroic action, they were able to ensure the hijackers did not reach their destination. But when this happened, Flight 93 crashed into an empty field outside of Shanksville, Pennsylvania. Local and state first responders arrived at the crash site within minutes, and federal authorities shortly after. The first tributes appeared at the perimeter of the investigation on that same day. Among the first tributes that arrived are those pictured here at an area that became the designated media village. Within the first 24 hours, PennDOT workers put up 2 20-foot flagpoles with the American and Pennsylvania state flags. A 4 by 8 foot board with the message, "Our prayers are with you," was left leaning against the flagpoles. 40 bouquets of flowers in makeshift vases were also left, and the Salvation Army erected a large wooden cross elsewhere at the site that was later moved to this area. More tributes followed rapidly. Without a designated space for their offerings, the public left tributes as close to the site as they were allowed, or followed the leads of others, placing tributes in growing clusters. On September 17th and September 20th, the families of the 40 were brought to the crash site. A private location was chosen as a place for the families to leave tributes, and hay bales were left there for them. These objects remained in the overlook area, away from the media and public. They were later collected and stored separately, as many of them contained personal items belonging to the 40 brought by their families, including this uniform belonging to Flight Attendant Lorraine Bay, left by her husband. These items were first collected by the Red Cross, who recognized their importance and sought to protect them from an imminent rainstorm. Several years later, in consultation with and by agreement of the families, these items were accessioned into the collection. The visiting public, drawn to the site, continued to leave tributes at the perimeter of the investigation. On October 10, 2001, a meeting was called to discuss the collection and curation needs at the Flight 93 site. Numerous stakeholders were present, including local, state, and federal government officials, United Airlines representatives, and National Park Service and local curators. The group agreed that it was too early to know the significance of the event or the objects left, but that they should be saved until their importance became clear. The collection would be cared for by Somerset Historical Center. Notably, in that first meeting, it was decided that all tributes would be saved, except for organic materials like flowers and live plants. The first mass collection of tributes took place 2 days later. At the end of October, at the urging of the county, the tributes left around the periphery of the crash site were relocated to a designated site. There, volunteers had put up a 40 by 10 foot fence. For years, this would serve as the temporary memorial until a permanent one was designed and constructed. These early actions, both in collecting the tributes and providing a spacious and dedicated platform on which to leave them, had a profound impact on the shape of the collection. In discussing the early tributes, it is worthwhile to consider the motivations behind the offerings. Why were they left, and who are they intended for? As I said before, the intention is not always clear, nor is it necessarily one thing or another. It is apparent, though, that the intentions behind the earliest tributes are distinct from ones left 5, 10, 20 years later. In an oral history interview given to the National Park Service in January 2006, Shanksville resident Michelle Glessner talked about the large sign that read, "Our prayers are with you," that she put out. Glessner said that upon hearing the news of the attacks, her first thoughts were for the families of those lost. She said, quote, "You don't think, was this terrorism? You immediately thought, what are those families going to do? That was our next thought, and that's what provoked the sign. You're thinking that you want them, the families, to know," end quote. When asked if she would put up the same message again, she replied, quote, "Yes, it says it all. It's it's everyone. Everybody you talked to felt the same way. Everybody you talked with was like, I can't imagine what the families are going through. I just can't imagine what they're going through. So the hour is everybody. I think everybody was thinking the same thing. I don't feel that it was my message at all. It was just a message, what everybody was thinking at the time, because everybody you talked to was thinking the same way," end quote. Glessner's thoughts are echoed across many of these early tributes. She and others recount how these first objects were made on the 11th, with materials coming from one person, construction and installation from another, on the property of yet a third. They stand as a testament from the people of Somerset County, meant specifically for the families of the 40. While some tributes were meant for families, other early messages, such as these hung on the fencing at a local airport, were intended for first responders, investigators, and support staff from across the country who were working with the investigation and protecting the crash site. These tributes were placed with the intention of supporting those involved in the response to the tragedy. In an oral history interview given in August 2011, FBI agent Todd McCall spoke about a local elementary school that he passed daily going to work at the crash site. He recounted watching flags appear in abundance around the school and how impactful it was to him. It was so meaningful, in fact, that on his last day, he stopped at the school to speak to the principal. He recalls saying to her, quote, "I just want to say thanks, because the flags and the dedication of these children has lifted the spirits and strengthened everybody that drives by here going out to the crisis site every day," end quote. In response, the principal handed Agent McCall the microphone to the PA system. McCall finished the story saying, quote, "And I said, boys and girls, teachers, I just want to say thanks. I'm one of the agents that's working out here where Flight 93 crashed, and your flags have meant a lot to all of us." Something along those lines. It may not have been that verbatim. But I had to leave then because there wasn't any way I could stand around because things were going to get emotional for me, and that can't happen for an FBI agent. So I said thanks and handed her the microphone, and I stepped out into the hall. And before I could get 2 steps away from the principal's office, and really only 30 feet from the front door, every door, classroom door in that building opened up, and these kids started flooding out and applauding. It was really, really kind of cool. So that said to me right then that we'll survive. We can take the shot and we'll survive. And hopefully these kids will remember that too, end quote. Agent Todd also spoke about the tributes left by the families at the crash site. He said, quote, "I remember going up there, and that was just a place that people would go and either start their day or end their day after they'd been at the site. They would go up there for a few minutes, and I did myself. And in fact, I took my family there eventually, years after, a couple years after. But yes, I do remember that, and it was a place you could go and think and just look over the crash site and get a sense of strength from those families," end quote. Although it seems unlikely that this outcome matched the motivation of those who left the tributes, it is nevertheless apparent in both of Agent McCall's stories that the tributes held great meaning to the responders who viewed them. The photographs of the school on the last slide were taken by a different FBI agent, showing that they resonated with more than one person. This photograph of a Pennsylvania State Police trooper at the family tributes captures the importance they came to have for investigators and first responders. Not every tribute, however, was left with the intention of being seen by a particular individual or group. Many people felt compelled simply to leave a small token of themselves, be it a name written on a board or a token they had on hand, something that would contribute to the material record and note, "I was here." Yet these tributes also found an appreciative audience as other visitors drew solace, comfort, or something greater from seeing these objects. Reverend Simons, who I quoted earlier, also spoke about watching visitors to the site looking at tributes in October 2001. Quote, "I don't understand where that gravity comes from. You just get there, and it's like there's a spirit about this place, this solemnity that was overpowering. People wander around. They don't say anything. They just look. And what are you looking at? You're looking at stuff, the stuff that people brought and left. There's nothing here that was here the day that it happened, but there's this collective mourning that you enter into with people you don't know and people who aren't even there, and it just has a power that's indescribable. You have to experience it," end quote. Of course, all this meant that the tribute collection grew rapidly. By fall 2003, it was close to 10,000 objects, and it had to be relocated to accommodate anticipated growth. When the collection was formally transferred to the National Park Service in February 2005, the inventory count was 17,863 items. By June 2009, an additional 12,750 items had been accessioned. By June 2014, a further 13,951 items had been accessioned, according to our records. For various reasons, cataloging did not keep pace with accessioning, and today... Thank you. And today, our backlog stands at over 43,700 items. It is worth noting in passing that we are not unique in this respect. The Vietnam Veterans Memorial has a backlog of around 75,000 objects after 30 years of collecting. In an attempt to mitigate this rapid growth, the park implemented restrictions on what would be accessioned into the collection for permanent keeping. In March 2004, the Curator, in consultation with park leadership and counsel from the National Park Service's Northeast Museum Services Center, decided that certain items, such as American flags devoid of markings, and artificial flowers, wreaths, and floral ribbons with no names or messages, would not be added to the collection. This was retroactively applied to tributes already collected. Culled items were documented in great detail, and those records were added to the collection in their stead. Otherwise, tributes collected from the first 2 years will remain a complete collection. But the collection continued to grow, and the decision was made to cull items known to have inherent vice, such as some plastics, cigarette lighters, objects in poor condition, and objects made of dough or foam, as well as common items left in abundance, or messages with illegible writing. The intention was to apply this to tributes collected after the first 2 years. While this policy was also intended to limit collecting and accessioning practices going forward, we have not yet had the chance to apply it retroactively, so our backlog remains large. We have continued to narrow the scope of what we accession, though, and currently we add only the most unique and personal tributes to the collection. This is not to say that these objects no longer have meaning. In fact, the value of the tribute collection is immense. In a 2003 article, the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette quoted the collection's curator on its importance. She observed, quote, "It's important to preserve what's being left at the site because, overall, it's a reflection of how America felt about this action," end quote. Speaking in the same article, then director of the Park Service's Northeast Museum Services Center said, quote, "It shows that people really do care about each other. It shows that people care and they find comradeship in the wake of tragedy," end quote. Since the tribute collection is a record of 20 years of sentiment, it can be used as a lens through which to study visitors to the site and how their responses have changed over time. The pieces in the tribute collection and the messages written on visitor comment cards can be used to map religious sentiment, patriotism, and gratitude, among other things. Many tributes are tied to professions. Patches from different first responders, business cards, and uniform hats and shirts are plentiful. Since many of the visitors often sign notes with some combination of name, age, or hometown, it would be possible to chart themes by these variables as well. In fact, Margaret Mary Kerr of the University of Pittsburgh has published multiple papers on this topic. Using tributes and messages left by children at the memorial, she explored how they understand death and their responses to tragedy. This work has benefited the memorial immensely, helping to shape the popular Junior Ranger program and parts of the exhibits in the visitor center. Another way to chart visitors' emotional reaction and their experience at the memorial is by examining how objects came to be there. While many of the tributes were clearly planned in advance, posters signed by a community, essays by school children, carefully constructed homages, combat boots, inscribed combat boots, framed messages, even a Christmas tree. Others were more spontaneous. These include notes written on receipts, notebook paper, visitor comment cards, objects grabbed from cars, including certain items of clothing or jewelry, business cards, and hair ties. The spontaneous tributes echo Reverend Simons's observations about the power of place. They are another way to say, "I was here." In addition to capturing the emotions of the visitor, the tributes are also a material culture record of the past 20 years. It would be interesting to survey a certain type of object in the collection to see its peaks and lows in popularity. An example, Beanie Babies were incredibly popular in the early 2000s and consequently were abundant as a tribute at the time. They were so popular that a few months ago, in an afternoon spent searching through 20 boxes of tributes, I found 6 of this same Beanie Baby bear, all left independently from each other. Of course, nowadays, we rarely get any Beanie Babies. Another unintended, though not insignificant aspect of the tribute collection is the message it sends simply by our keeping it. By preserving the messages, mementos, and memorabilia left by visitors, the National Park Service has said that each individual's contribution to the greater memorial is important. It reaffirms that their experience is valued and recognized, that they are part of a larger community of visitors. It serves as a testament that it is a memorial for everyone, not just the community impacted by Flight 93. But as I'm sure you are all aware, every collection, no matter how important, has its own challenges. At Flight 93, we face problems that I am sure that many of you are familiar with. One of the largest challenges with the collection is its size. While a collection of 50,000 objects is not large compared to other sites, only about 20% of this is cataloged. The rest is in various stages of processing. Some have been accessioned but not cataloged, some have been sorted but not accessioned, and to my chagrin, recent tributes are still in the bags the Rangers put them in when they are collected. When the tribute collection was begun, it was the only material record of the event available to the memorial. In the years since, though, our collection has grown beyond the tributes to include donated objects and archives from family members, investigators, and first responders. We are also processing the incoming UA collection, which stands for United Airlines, that is comprised of about 600 pieces of plane wreckage. Also, from 2005 to 2017, dedicated historians collected over 880 oral histories on behalf of the memorial. These donations, combined with countless other projects in the 5 parks, means that processing the backlog will take years. In the meantime, the value of the tribute collection that I spoke of earlier is largely unrealized. It exists as potential more than actual value. As it stands, the collection is largely inaccessible to staff and researchers. Though it has not been entirely processed, the collection takes up a considerable amount of space, filling hundreds of boxes and extensive shelf space. When I began here at the park, the need for space was so dramatic that we ended up renting storage off-site and relocating several collections there, including Flight 93. Although I touched on this earlier, the ephemeral nature of tributes also presents a challenge. The intended lifespan of these tributes is often considerably less than the ambitious in perpetuity standard established for National Park Service collections. Tributes are often made of materials riddled with inherent vice that our best intentions cannot overcome. I do not need to tell y'all about the struggle against tape, Sharpies, construction paper, glue, stickers, newspapers, lamination, synthetic textiles and dyes, markers, oil and water-based paints, and the variety of clips, nails, pins, and hooks used to attach tributes to the fence. Add to this the climate of Western Pennsylvania that these tributes sit in for days, weeks, months, and even years. Although some of the more fragile tributes are collected after only a brief stint on display, many others are left up for extended periods of time. You may have noticed in pictures of the temporary memorial that the Shanksville Volunteer Fire Company left a turnout coat with their signatures hanging on the fence. It is visible in pictures from almost any year. This is partially a testament to the durability of the fabric, but it's also worth noting that as the coats deteriorated, the Shanksville Volunteer Fire Company would sign a new one and leave it hanging on the fence, with the result that we have 4 or 5 incredibly fragile, faded, and torn turnout coats from them in our collection. But they are a tribute that was clearly intended to be seen by the visitors. The coats are so striking, in fact, that we recently loaned one out for temporary exhibit at the U.S. Embassy in London for the 20th anniversary of September 11th. These are not the only tributes on exhibit. As well as other outgoing loans, there is also a collection of tributes on exhibit in our visitor center, laid out in a case that echoes the design of the temporary memorial. In all, the tribute collection offers a more accessible way for the public to engage with the Flight 93 story, an otherwise tragic and traumatic event. Viewed through the lens of the tribute collection and the emotional responses it represents, the story becomes one of not violence and anger, but rather of community, patriotism, and care.